Welcome to the Open Treasury podcast, your go-to source for the latest news and analysis in corporate cash and treasury management. This show is brought to you by CTMfile.com and the Treasury News Network, where Treasury professionals learn and share the information that matters most. And now your host, Jack Large.
Hello and welcome to the fourth Open Treasury podcast from CTMfile. I'm Jack Large, editor, and I have with me today Craig Jeffery, managing partner at Strategic Treasurer, and our deputy editor, Ben Poole. And we've been looking at things over the last couple of weeks, and we're going to review today, the 29th of September, the latest Treasury news and developments. The first one we're going to look at is something that's done regularly, about once a year, the AFP risk survey. And you reviewed this, Ben. What was new there? What was interesting out of what was been pretty regular report?
Yeah, so like you say, it's the annual risk survey from AFP. And I suppose the new element that you'd see from this as businesses are kind of coming out of the other side of the coronavirus pandemic is that managing people effectively was identified as being the key in withstanding any future crises. Obviously, this is as it's AFP, it was a poll of Treasury practitioners, and it was a really high number. 84% of respondents believe that managing people effectively during a crisis will actually help them in coping better with the next crisis. So that's looking at things like keeping employees engaged, adapting, being able to adapt to alternative work environments, flexibility with staff and letting staff deal with their mental health, for example, just so that you've got your staff working on kind of full cylinders in terms of being able to manage all of the Treasury tasks that they have.
And what was the level of response? Did they get an increased response compared to last year?
I believe they usually target around 250 to 300 treasurers. So they this year had 272 treasurers. So I think that's a pretty good sample size of Treasury population. They also found that almost half of respondents, 47%, agree that managing risks at their organisations in the past year had become more strategic. I think it was commented that the contribution of Treasury managing macroeconomic risk, technology risk, and also liquidity and financial risk has increased significantly in importance within their organisations. So that's kind of another confirmation, I suppose, of the strategic side of Treasury growing.
Interesting. Very important, the human aspect of business, and never more so than in fraud. Craig, you reviewed the man-in-the-middle attacks in fraud and what's happening. What was your take on your review?
Since man-in-the-middle attacks have been going on for quite some time, what's different or what's been changed, and what are we hearing? One of the styles of creating fake websites has been around for some time. We've also seen an increase in a combination of other methods of amplifying this attack, including calling people and getting a second person to get on the computer to provide confirmation during a file transfer, or indicating that they're having a hard time getting in. And so they're gathering more information to amplify the effectiveness of the attack. So that's another activity, just like ransomware has grown in effectiveness as they've exfiltrated data. They put an extra rush on it. Same thing's happening in this environment as well. So, and that's just one aspect of man-in-the-middle attacks.
And the thing that's technology is coming in here all the time. I mean, there are increasing number of different systems which will track your keyboard pattern and behavior, rather like the way people talk. Are there any other new technologies coming through that they showed would work?
For these types of attacks? Yeah. So the, ARP poisoning, the method of how your computers know which is the router, whether it's in a public space like a coffee shop, or if they can somehow take control of a machine. I don't know that method has increased significantly, but it's certainly still underway. And whether that's because there's more work from home, people using other sites, we're unsure. But the sophistication of making your computer think it's going to your main router when it's really going to a controlled device and reading everything that you have while letting you, do your web browsing or activities is a pretty significant issue. And so I think that there's a lot of ramifications for those in Treasury, those who are working from home, to make sure all of that's consistent and safe.
Okay, so moving on to probably the most important piece of thing we reported over the last couple of weeks was Citi's Treasury Diagnostic report, which is a methodology of looking at the way corporates behave, but a very structured way. Ben, you wrote the report on this, and we're starting to see some interesting patterns emerge, aren't we?
Absolutely. Yeah. Like you say, this is a really interesting report that surveys the opinions of 475 large corporates. So again, a significant selection to poll. This survey found that 57% of respondents are looking at transformative opportunities across both their core business and their Treasury function, and that driving efficiency within Treasury and augmenting decision-making are now two of the top two expectations when investing in emerging technologies. But I think it's interesting to note that there's this big focus on emerging technologies, but on the other side of the spectrum, a lot of the respondents are saying that they've not really got to a level of automation that they're comfortable with. And kind of low levels of connectivity with bank systems, for example, and just general problems with integrating their tech ecosystem, if I can say that properly. So 64% reported that their TMS, their treasury management system, is either not integrated or only partially integrated with their enterprise resource planning, ERP systems, which is a likely root cause for significant use of manual processes to support cash flow forecasting, which obviously slows things down and makes work prone to error. And I believe that the report also says 80% remain reliant on having Microsoft Excel as a part of the tech stack supporting the forecasting process. So there's lots of ambition in terms of what emerging technologies can do, but there's also still work to do on automating some of the basics of treasury management as well.
It's quite bizarre. There was one example where the company hadn't got an ERP. And this is a large company, obviously, because Citi don't work for small people. Yeah, we've got a follow-up analysis of the results in a different way in the next couple of days, which will show the importance of the methodology to improve your cash and treasury processes throughout the organization. And the other thing that was really quite amazing is that we found in the follow-up work that the treasurers welcomed being told that they had out-of-date systems and needed to really improve them, because this gave them ammunition to tell their bosses, really do need to invest more. Very interesting piece of work. The other thing that we talked about was ESG, and I did an article on the lack of reporting on how companies are doing on reducing their climate impact. It highlighted the fact that we need a multi-dimensional approach to this problem. The first problem being what metrics to use, how do you understand what's going on in the wider impact, and then how do you bring all this together? And only one supplier with a platform called ATM from the stakeholder company had any attempt at really bringing all of the things together in ESG. Really quite scary that there's only one supplier doing this completely, but a very impressive piece of work that they've got working on their platform. But the consequences of the rest of the world not having much clue of the impact on Treasury on the climate is really horrendous, really, really, really scary. So that were the 4 things that we looked at in detail. In the roundup, what would you say were the key things for you, Ben?
So I think it was interesting that Deutsche Bank announced a trio of inaugural sovereign green bonds this week that they've launched over the past couple of weeks, including the most recent one was the largest ever green bond to date, which was a £10 billion inaugural green gilt for the UK's Debt Management Office. So, I mean, that was anchored by a core domestic investor base, and the transaction had an order book of in excess of 100 billion. So the largest green bond on issuance, I think, was really interesting. And also Spain and Serbia were 2 of the other sovereign green bonds that Deutsche Bank helped arrange. So I think that's interesting, just seeing the scope of that market increasing in size. And kind of a second point on maybe hype area that treasurers are interested in was a story we ran on stablecoins in Treasury. A tech company called WonderFi Technologies has said that it's going to be using US dollar denominated stablecoins in its treasury management strategy. And stablecoins are interesting because they're digital currencies, but they're backed by a fiat currency. So, one US dollar coin is equal to $1 US, and so on. The interesting thing with stablecoins is that they might feel the wrath or at least the touch of the regulator shortly. I know that the Federal Reserve, when they were reviewing what had happened at the start of the COVID pandemic in March 2020, noted that, and this is a quote from their report, new financial arrangements such as stablecoins appear to have the same structural maturity and liquidity transformation vulnerabilities as prime money funds did at the time, but with less transparency and an underdeveloped regulatory framework. So that certainly sounds like that underdeveloped framework might be getting more attention in the coming years. So I thought that was quite interesting. You see these sort of headlines of individual treasuries dabbling in crypto of one variety or another. And it seems to still be a little bit of maybe a bit of a wild west in terms of what you're getting into. And it is largely these tech companies that are maybe from the crypto world to start with that are going in head first with this stuff. I think most corporates will be observing what's going on and looking at these currencies or crypto assets and seeing if there is any long-term value for treasury management in them.
But they're going to keep remembering what the central bank said. You've got to be cautious. You've got to be cautious. And the other piece on the cybercoin area is that El Salvador's move to Bitcoin as a currency for the whole island is not going well. Craig, for you, what was the big takeaway from the last 2 weeks?
I'm going to follow Ben's pattern and do 2. He slipped a couple in there. One was the physical events for Treasury. They seem to be starting back. And while there's a little bit of a dampening of enthusiasm by how many people are there, just talking to people, they seem either giddy or close to giddy with how exciting it was to interact face-to-face in person. I think that's going to be interesting to see what happens over the next few months as the fall events come about. Second, and more to the topic at hand, this idea of speed moving towards real time, and I'm going to tie back into the Citi assessment report, the report that Ben was talking about. What's happening is faster instant payments. They had indicated basically a little over 40% saw it as a huge area of opportunity and an area that Treasury is pursuing. So, over 40% are pursuing faster payments. The other area of faster, I would say, would be connections and the use of APIs. Again, similar numbers in terms of seeing it as value, around 41% and 26% are currently pursuing it from this particular report. And so I think those are pretty big themes about faster combined with better. So something to watch over time.
Faster doesn't mean easier to manage, though. I've had a couple of corporate treasurers complain to me about everything clearing immediately, which means it clears immediately and gets into the bank account overnight or over the weekend. And how do you manage that position? It's going to be interesting watching that. The other piece that I kept coming up against was how the use of, in the week that Greta Thunberg said blah-de-blah-de-blah, as ever more politicians say they're going to get to net zero, and then she quoted another blah-de-blah-de-blah, is she is getting the attention of the Treasury space. And so, for example, the Goldman Sachs initiative in their transaction banking to add a green bond linked to their cash management system is an example of what's happening. At long last, the business world, the financial world, is waking up to the need to do this. The trouble is the politicians are not moving very fast at all. Well, I think that's it for this week, apart from to say goodbye to Ben, it's his final podcast as he moves on to fresh pastures. Ben, I'd just like to say thank you for your excellent work in editing on CTMfile over the last couple of years or so. You'll be sorely missed.
Oh, thanks very much, Jack. I really appreciate that. And I know that it's exciting times for CTMfile ahead with Strategic Treasurer's involvement now. So I think I'm leaving it, it's a bittersweet time to go, but really enjoyed working on CTMfile the past couple of years. And with you, Jack, it's always good to chat, and I'm sure we'll carry on having our chats into the future.
This podcast is provided for informational purposes only, and statements made by Strategic Treasurer LLC on this podcast are not intended as legal, business, consulting, or tax advice. For more information, visit and bookmark strategictreasurer.com.